Welcome back to the Garden Hutch. Today we'll discuss the production from the pallet garden during 2022. Let's get going. So today we're going to do the third and final video in this series. We are going to review the production from our pallet bed from 2022. Just something I wanted to mention ahead of time is, out of all three gardens, the pallet bed was the only one that was completed at the beginning of 2022. In fact, I believe that we had it set up in 2020. So the success that we had from this in the first 2 years were the inspiration for doing the rest of our gardens and raised beds. So much like the other two videos, the way we're going to construct this video is I'm going to start by talking about the mistakes that we made. We'll move on to the things that excelled during 2022, and then we'll wrap it up with a few notes. So the first and by far the biggest mistake that we made here in the pallet garden was I did not allow enough space per plant. So I learned my lesson from that. I did it a couple times last year in the other gardens, and I spoke about that in the other videos. But going forward, I will allow a lot more space per plant, especially things like the ones that pop into my head were the watermelons. We overplanted those. We put watermelons and cantaloupe in the same bed. We won't make that mistake again. We also did the same thing when it came to the Swiss chard and the kale in relation to the cayenne peppers. The second mistake is a mistake I made in all my beds last year, just from a gardening perspective overall, was I simply did not water enough last year. So going forward, I've kind of have a plan to rectify that. I believe working the soil and making sure that I check for moisture significantly deeper in the bed whenever I water. Also, I think what I need to do is just water longer, not more often, and make sure that I get the water farther into the beds, and that'll probably help protect it from a lot of the heat. Another thing is I really plan on adding probably an extra inch of straw this next year, and hopefully that will help us out quite a bit. We also have kind of a watering system that we want to try this year, where we use some recycled bottles to use for like a slow watering. So again, the second big mistake I made was just simply not watering enough. The third big failure from the pallet garden on my part was a failure to plan correctly. I had an idea of what I wanted to grow in the spring and then what I wanted to grow in the summer, but I didn't really have a concrete plan of the dates and the times and make sure the crops sort of worked out together. So when the time came to sort of start planting my summer crops, what ended up happening was I found myself planting the summer crops and a lot of time killing off my spring crops, and it just wasn't good for either one of them. So going forward, I have a much better idea of the time frames, and what I've done is I've spread them out enough to where none of my plants should be in conflict with each other, since that I have sort of beds dedicated to a spring and a fall, as opposed to trying to finish up spring and then rush into summer. So I'm hoping that that'll rectify the situation this year. So before we get to the absolute wins, I wanted to throw in a couple draws, I guess. For me, corn was in this, is because we had some beautiful corn plants and they had some nice big ears of corn on them. But much like the year before, about 3 days before they were ripe enough for us to pick, we had a pack of raccoons that came through and ate every single ear of corn, just destroyed them all. So while the plants were beautiful and the ears looked great, I never got to try them. I'm also going to throw in kale and chard here. We got quite a bit of both of them, but the reason I'm going to put them as sort of a draw is because they just got shadowed out by our cayenne peppers, and so they just didn't last the year that I wanted. You know, our whole goal is to have salads the entire year, from hopefully this year from mid-February all the way through to December. So the problem with the chard and the kale, those are our leaf lettuces during the hot part of the summer. They both grow well and you can eat them as salads. But alas, the cayenne peppers just grew massive and shaded them all out. So while we did eat some, they're going to go in the draw category. And the last one I'm going to put in the draw category is the parsley. Now the reason for this is we had beautiful parsley last year and I used quite a bit of it. But what I did was I did some research on the kind of parsley that I was growing, and I put it in up here in the trough. And the parsley I was growing could turn into this massive plant if it had enough room. So while we got a lot of parsley off that plant, I totally inhibited its growth by putting it in the trough. So those are the draws. So now it's time for the wins. Anybody familiar with this channel has probably got a pretty good idea of where I'm going to start. We'll start with the tomatoes. So this year in the Pallet Garden, we put in 4 Sweet Million cherry tomato plants, and they were absolutely superb. We had cherry tomatoes starting, I believe, in early June, and we picked them all the way through until the frost killed them off. And we got a bunch. I believe I had to trim the plants back like 3 or 4 times through the course of the summer. And even while I know I could have watered more and gotten more production, we still had more tomatoes than we could possibly do anything with. We were giving buckets away to neighbors and friends and family and things. So if I had to start with the win, of course, my very favorite, I'm gonna say the tomatoes were the biggest win from the Pallet Garden. The second win I want to discuss in this video is the salad beds. Now, I know I said that we crowded out the kale and the chard, and that's true, we did, but we did eat quite a bit of it as well. But the real part I wanted to concentrate on is starting in April, we started getting leaf lettuces and butter crunch lettuce. We were able to eat that from April all the way through to mid-June. That's in mid-June is when we started eating on the kale and the chard, and then the cayenne pepper sort of took them over and killed them off by beginning of August. So from August to, I don't know, September-ish or so, we didn't have any salad. But for that first part of the year, not only did we have enough salad for Leslie and I to eat every day, we had salads for us to eat twice a day, and we were able to share with friends and family. So as the second win, I'm definitely going to say our salad beds. For our third win from the Pallet Garden, I'm going to bring in some of our springtime plants here, and our carrots and beets this year were absolutely fantastic. These do kind of go a little bit with the salads because we ate them all sort of at the same time right there at the beginning of June. We also munch on our beet greens throughout the entire springtime, so if you haven't tried that, you definitely need to. But we got a lot of beets. We were able to roast some and freeze them for later in the summer. They were delicious. We got a bunch of carrots. Carrots are something that we are really starting to enjoy growing here. Believe it or not, it seems like carrots are the most social vegetable for some reason. People love to come over and pull carrots. But here at number 3 in the Pallet Garden, the win would be our beets and carrots. Peppers were also a huge win from the Pallet Garden this year. We put a lot of peppers away. In fact, I have a video that we did earlier this week, about where we went through and discussed our 2023 plan for peppers, and I'll put that above right now. But from a 2022 perspective, we grew a lot of peppers in the Pallet Garden. The only reason I didn't rate this higher is because we totally overcrowded them, and I really didn't have a plan going into the season for what I was going to do with all the peppers, so I didn't save as many of them as I could have. We also grew a lot of cayenne peppers, and while we did find uses for them, and they came out with some really delicious recipes, surprising me since I don't really care for spicy peppers, but the downside to them was during, I think August, we were picking 5-gallon buckets every 2 weeks. And it's really difficult to do something with a 5-gallon bucket of cayenne peppers. And unlike the other peppers, people don't seem to want to take them to do things with as much. So, you know, to remedy that going into next year, we're just going to grow fewer cayenne pepper plants. We've also added a bigger bed for our peppers going forward. But anyway, peppers definitely deserve a spot on this list. So we'll wrap this video up by mentioning cantaloupes here at the end of the win list. They're at the end of it because, you know, like I said earlier, I overplanted them with watermelons. We could have gotten so many more, but we did start getting cantaloupes in early June, and we picked them all the way through August. We got over 20 cantaloupes from just one of these beds. So for us, that was incredible. You know, they make a great treat in the middle of the summertime. I put them at the end because I just can't help but feel like we could have gotten more. I hope this video turns out okay. You can tell it's a bit windy here in 7B in January. So for everyone who made it here to the end, I sure appreciate you folks. Until next time, I hope you all take care of yourselves. Peace.